Hey guys, it's Rachel. I'm sorry that I didn't make a video on Thursday. Things have kind of been difficult, and sorry, I'm just making. Things have been difficult, and I had a very difficult session with my psychiatrist yesterday, and kind of had a major meltdown. So medication and dealing with my mood and all of that kind of stuff is going on. So that's why Thursday nothing got done. I did have a good week though. I actually went to see Drake in concert, which I'm sure is probably something, the last thing you'd think that I would do. We saw The Weeknd as well and actually had a really, really good night. So that's something really positive that went on this week. And today I'm talking about dealing with another diagnosis after being diagnosed with an eating disorder. So I guess there's two parts to that. I guess there's a diagnosis that when you've been diagnosed with an eating disorder that comes following that. So for example, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, and following that was diagnosed with a number of different things whilst my eating disorder was still active. And then following the full recovery from my eating disorder, I was then diagnosed with bipolar. So I guess I'll take both of them. So for those of you who are still not just actively eating disordered, but who are in recovery and moving forward with that, and in that time or at present are being questioned, diagnosed with different things. And then I'll talk about those who have pretty much fully recovered from their eating disorder and what perhaps comes after that and what we have to manage after that despite our behaviours, and also not going back to those behaviours despite dealing with something very, very difficult itself. When I was first diagnosed, the most obvious thing that was there for me was anorexia, and so that diagnosis stayed with me for a good couple of years. When I started self-harming and my depression became even more evident, it also began to show that as a teenager, around the age of 14, I had some form of childhood depression. There were certain behaviours that were used during that time, non-eating disordered behaviours, and issues to do with managing, I guess, what was anger and distress and not feeling like I wanted to be here, doing things to myself such as taking overdoses. I mean, I was never taken into hospital for these things. I was never admitted because of an overdose and taken to the hospital because of it. That doesn't take away the severity of that, but it was something, nobody was ever involved in it. It wasn't anything that people knew about. So it wasn't really recognised as anything at that point. And of course, because of my age, being a teenager of that age, we all go through difficult periods of time, whether it's friendships, relationships. Quite often they say, don't they, with teenagers, that we can act kind of out of character in many ways. We're becoming our own people. So that all happened, and then when I was 19, I was diagnosed. As the years passed, it became obvious that my depression was an issue. It became obvious that my self-harm was an issue. And within all of that, there started to be different diagnoses thrown around. The list is insane. So you might say that I had that initial diagnosis, and then OCD started to become more of a bigger issue for me. My self-harm was tied up in a lot of OCD rituals, as was my eating disorder, and my depression seemed to worsen the more severe my eating disorder got. The more severe my depression got, the more severe my eating disorder got, and so it was this mixture of depression and behaviours. And in many ways I controlled my mood using my eating disorder. So I would, and OCD really, I would have a set of rituals. My self-harm was always very planned. It was always something it was like my therapist used to describe it as taking the painkiller before the pain comes. So every morning I would wake up and I would self-harm for a period of time before I went to work, and that was my way of saying, right, today is going to be manageable, today is going to be okay. I would plan how I would avoid food and do all of that. And although I'm not saying that that's the way that you should deal with your mood, that was the way that I dealt with my mood. So although my mood was an issue, my insomnia was an issue, I dealt with it very clearly with behaviours. And what you'll find is that when more behaviours come along, the most common diagnosis is borderline personality disorder, and it's probably one of them which is most misdiagnosed as well, because when you've got a cluster of issues, it's kind of where they put it. So not only would you have the person with anorexia and OCD and depression and anxiety disorder, you would then group all of those things together, sort of with repetitive self-injury as well. You would group that into and say, right, okay, that person's borderline, because they also have abandonment issues, they also have a deep depression, they also have maybe issues concerning a shopping addiction, promiscuity. The degree of self-harm can vary from sort of severe cutting, burning. You can go into behaviours like I did, such as pulling out hair, head banging, thumping things, breaking things, and generally a very unstable mood. And what others can consider something that has very much been, isn't necessarily something that's organic or a predisposition, that it's quite often because of an environment that you were brought up in. So you're talking about an environment where your mother was incredibly overprotective, which is, I guess, more the side I fall on, or on the side of an abusive upbringing. And when I was being treated in these early days and diagnosed with things like borderline personality disorder, I wasn't aware of any abuse. Now, I didn't have any abuse in childhood. The abuse that I perhaps endured in childhood was concerning my gymnastics career, and that was physically and emotionally very abusive. But in terms of sexual abuse, that didn't come until, later my teenage years, when I was raped repeatedly and things. But that kind of amnesia was there for me. And so at that point, that's what they put, the issues that I had were based on that. They were based on that being something, how I was how I was always going to be. And whilst I would maybe get better and things would move forward, that they wouldn't always be completely better. So my eating disorder would always be there, where I would always use a degree of self-harm. I would always use behaviours. My life, I wouldn't ever live a life that was free from mental disorder or from learnt behaviours, that despite the amount of DBT I may have, that those things were still very prominent. What I will say is that if you are diagnosed with an eating disorder and you're also diagnosed with other disorders, schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, or some other sort of personality disorder, I'm not saying ignore it, because I'm not a professional and I'm not your professional. What I will say to you is that you need to work, even if your eating disorder wasn't the first issue, self-harm or an anxiety disorder or a depression that was very evident, until your eating disorder is stable, until your weight's stable, until what you're eating and maintaining is stable, until you're not starving yourself or restricting yourself or being sick or overeating or losing weight, gaining weight, doing whatever, if your body isn't there, your mind isn't going to be there. So where I fall, and this is something I very strongly believe in, and I'm not saying it's the right thing for everybody, is that until your eating disorder is stable, you cannot make a correct diagnosis on somebody. And I believe in that just so strongly. That is one of the strongest beliefs I've got concerning what I've been through and what I see other people go through, that you cannot make a correct diagnosis on somebody. I know of people who are severely anorexic and are diagnosed with things like borderline personality disorder, but to me, I may have seen them when they have been more stable, when their mood is better, when their eating is better, when their weight is better, when they are more stable in a physical capacity, that a lot of those traits which are brought into borderline personality disorder start to disperse. So a person may act more like themselves, they may have a connection with the world that's very different than when they do with an eating disorder. They might not isolate themselves as much, they might not be using behaviours. So overall their mindset is in a better place, and those characteristics of something like borderline personality disorder are no longer really relevant. And I've said this to many professionals of people I've known, and sort of said, well, look, I've been around this person when their eating's been better, when they've not been self-harming, when their mood has overall been better, when they've been sleeping better, when they've been getting up and having things in their day that move them forward and give them a more positive outlook. That a diagnosis for borderline personality disorder wouldn't fit in there. So I therefore believe that that person does not have borderline personality disorder. I believe that that person has an eating disorder that is severe enough to warrant a diagnosis within those terms, because even things like OCD, anxiety tend to lessen as an eating disorder improves. That isn't always what happens. For me, my anxiety, my OCD, my self-harm, as I recovered from my eating disorder, all of those things improved. Now, as I said last week, I do still use self-harm behaviours very infrequently, but it is still there. What they have been able to do since my body has been well, 2004 to kind of 2007, I relapsed in 2007, and since then I've been pretty much fully recovered from my eating disorders. I certainly haven't slipped into behaviours over the past 4, 5, 6 years or so. I never use eating disorder behaviours. It's not even there for me. I doesn't say that I don't have my moments with kind of how I feel towards my body, but that's not there. And nothing is as severe as it was when I was ill, apart from the lows that I can have. And that degree of mood shift is what has led to that belief that this is something purely organic. So that may be something you find. You may find that once you are recovered from your eating disorder and very stable with that, that there is still something there, a depression, some sort of mood disorder, a bipolar, anxiety disorder, OCD, a number of different things that you could battle with. And for me, it's bipolar, and I hate that. I hate that I've come so far in my recovery. I hate that I can't use behaviours. Well, I could use them, but I hate that I have to deal with this, and I hate that I feel like shit at the moment, and I hate it. And yeah, I can't do anything about it but work with the people who I trust and work with those who see this as purely organic. I've not had therapy since 2010. There really isn't anything else that I could deal with in therapy that would take how I feel away. There's psychological triggers, there's things that affect me, of course, but these shifts in my mood are purely what they are. They are waking up one day and just feeling like crap. And that's a hard thing to carry with me, but can't do anything about it. I actually can't do anything about it. So if you're in that place, all I can say to you is that you're not alone, that I do understand. I know how hard it is to recover and fight off all your demons, to still struggle with something that impacts your daily life like it does mine, to be wanting to do more things than you are like I do. I wish I could do more. There's so many more things I would do if my mood didn't impact me day to day. And to just hang in there, because that's all we can do. And again, you're not alone, and we just have to keep believing. And I will see you next week. Love you guys. Bye. Bye.